Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Hey, this is James O'Neill. President Trump announced on April 21st that he is extending a ceasefire with Iran, citing internal divisions within the Iranian government and requests from Pakistani leaders. While delaying military action, Trump said the U.S. would maintain its naval blockade of Iranian ports and remain ready to strike if negotiations fail. Talks may take place in Islamabad, though Iran has not confirmed participation. Tensions remain high after U.S. forces seized vessels and enforced sanctions. Iranian officials condemned these actions as violations of the ceasefire and warned they would defend national interests amid ongoing diplomatic uncertainty. President Trump urged Iran on April 21st to release 8 women reportedly facing execution, framing the move as a potential goodwill gesture ahead of renewed negotiations between Washington and Tehran. Posting on Truth Social, Trump said sparing the women would be a great start to talks, though their identities and circumstances remain unverified. Trump has warned of possible renewed strikes if no agreement is reached, while Iran has rejected negotiations under threat and signaled readiness for confrontation. A senior British civil servant, Sir Oliver Robbins, told Parliament that Downing Street pressured officials to fast-track Peter Mandelson's appointment as ambassador to the United States, contradicting the government's account. Robbins said there was a dismissive attitude towards security vetting and that Mandelson was publicly announced before the process began. The Foreign Office insisted on completing checks, which reportedly raised concerns, though details remain undisclosed. Robbins also alleged another controversial diplomatic appointment attempt. His dismissal has intensified scrutiny of Prime Minister Keir Starmer, with critics accusing him of a pattern of poor judgment in handling the scandal. Members of France's Les Républicains have overwhelmingly selected Bruno Retailleau as their candidate for the next presidential election, with 73.8% backing him over holding a primary. Retailleau, a conservative figure, has taken strong positions in immigration and Islamism and pledged to restore order, justice, and freedom while uniting the right. His selection may signal a rightward shift in French politics, though divisions remain over alliances with figures like Éric Zemmour and Marine Le Pen. Analysts note that a fragmented right could risk losing ground to both far-left and centrist candidates in the upcoming race. A survey found that 60% of French adults believe the country is undergoing a great replacement, defined as a demographic shift toward non-European populations, particularly from Africa. Among those respondents, most viewed the trend negatively. Opinions varied by political affiliation, with higher concern among supporters of Marine Le Pen and lower concern among left-wing voters. The data highlights growing divisions over immigration and identity as political groups increasingly appeal to different demographic and ideological constituencies in France. A majority of Germans believe the country's decision to phase out nuclear power was a mistake, according to a survey reported by Die Welt. About 53% said shutting down reactors, completed in April of 2023 under governments led by Angela Merkel and Olaf Scholz, was wrong, compared to 40% who supported it. While only 39% favor reviving nuclear energy, many expressed limited concern about safety risks. The shift in opinion comes amid Europe's energy crisis. Even Ursula von der Leyen has called the phase-out a strategic mistake, reflecting growing debate over energy policy across Europe. Retired General Jack Keane discusses reports the IRGC is consolidating power inside Iran.
To assist with the execution of our wartime objectives. The Israelis, who had some ammunition shortages, have full magazine depth now. So if we go back to combat operations, they are going to be absolutely full throttle and considerably more dramatic than anything the Iranians have experienced, to include all the targets the president is talking about, and then some.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. Now the protagonists.
With the latest information and analysis of major events from around the world, this is today's News Talk, The World Today.
To the Protagonists, nice to have your company. If you ever see those planes that got sticky tape all over it, we're a bit like that today. One of those days, anyway, we get through it. Now, what did COVID-19 achieve for mass awakening? not much, we fear, during this dark time of state censorship, unconscionable mandates, mass injections, just rolls on, curfews and overt and widespread corruption of public officials and witch doctors of medicine. We saw the emergence of individuals who risked their reputations and careers to fight back. We also saw the rise of political movements and huge demonstrations in the street against government. COVID-19 came and went, leaving a shocking trail of suffering of the vaccine injured and those individuals who defied authority. However, the poison jabs continue to be distributed, with their deadly results proven in countless death certificates, official data set and peer-reviewed papers. The focus has shifted from COVID-19, but internet censorship, the cruel silencing of dissidents, mass surveillance and media with its alter egos is even more corrupt than before. Woohoo! Now, while there are many still fighting against the vax, we ask, where are the freedom groups and the truthers? Where are they? Hang on, no, not here. That led demonstrations and fought against mainstream media lies. Surely the environment is far darker than it was during COVID-19, but where is the dissent in Australia? Our panel, we're waiting on one from New Zealand, but at the moment we have two very well qualified people. We have Peter Campion. Peter Campion, thank you for joining me. Independent researcher, retired fire commander and investigator, libertarian, energy realist. He's all those and more. We also have with us Jason Olbourne. A new background, do I see? Jason Olbourne, thank you for joining us. He's an Australian political commentator, independent media host, and all-round good guy, megastar of TNT, and all those other things that we will lie about. But gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Good to see you, Mike. It's great to be back on the show, and great to see Peter.
Peter, you need to turn your microphone on.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Mike.
Yep,
Jason was a fellow UAP candidate. Sorry, go on.
Yes, no, it's all good. First of all, I just want to ask you, Peter, and Matt Shelton would join us in about 5 seconds, if Cam could just fix it for me. Where are all the truthers, and where are all the those that are going to save us? Remember those? They kept, COVID really brought them to life. You put water on them, they come to life, and maybe there's no water, but they're not around anymore. These groups that were going to save us, where are they?
Well, in my humble opinion, a lot of them have gone back to sleep. There's also a fairly high percentage who have become so black-pilled that they're not even attempting to bring the rest of the community along with them. They're only focusing on their own tight-knit group of friends and family, the people that they believe that they will be looking to for support and mutual protection when the planned collapse of Western civilization is completed by the powers that be. Now, you might detect from that comment that I'm somewhat of a black pillar myself. And this is because the overwhelming evidence in front of us is that the Uni Party, the Labor Liberal National Green Teal Uni Party, and its equivalents in every developed Western nation are working to the same ends. They are on a mass depopulation effort. The COVID poison jabs didn't work quite how they expected, and consequently they're now going after energy. So to get back to your question, a lot of the community, the freedom warriors have just given up, looking after themselves now. Some have gone back to sleep. They just can't see that there's any point in even trying. And of course, the groups themselves still exist, but the people that are manning them now tend to be, well, socialists, because socialists have the advantage where they can spend a lot of time socialising, and they're very good at it, whereas conservatives don't really want to hang around a little group and blow wind on each other. They just want to go about their own business, and you'll know from your own experience.
That's excellent. I've caught almost all of it. Dr. Matt Shelton, founding member of NZDSOS, thank you for joining us. Question to you, where have all the freedom groups gone?
Hi, Mike, and hey, guys. We haven't met before. Well, I kind of disagree with your premise somewhat. And there may be, there's a commonality with a lot of what's been said already that we're obviously suffering from here. I can broadly speak to, what I know of the much smaller freedom movement, of course. We're only 5 million, and so necessarily we're a bit more fragmented, I suppose, compared to the might and size of the Aussie groups. But we're still battling away, and we haven't gone anywhere. What there's been, certainly in the last few years, we're not stupid, and there's been, a lot of soul searching, and I think some kind of long dark night of the souling going on as people understand actually how monstrous and evil the things we are actually facing. I think it's legitimate that people are, doing whatever sort of, economic and practical and spiritual prepping that they feel they need to do. But on the upside, what's happening a lot here is that people are reconnecting with people that they lost connections from. And people across the divide. And this is anecdotal, but there are plenty of stories to back this up. Are trying to reconnect with some of us who saw what was going on and have been screaming into a void that comes about because of relentless censorship. So one of the reasons we may seem to have disappeared is simply because the state is doing such a great job silencing us. Doing whatever they can do, because this is a war. We have no doubt about it. It's a war for humanity, and people play dirty in these things. So we are up against it, but there's been a repositioning of the main groups as we've all come after 5 years of this to understand just how many laws are being broken, how willful the ignoring of the basic human rights that are all ours. To take, they're not a favor that's granted to us, but that's the way the other side has been proceeding. And because we've stayed the course and we've played every hand that's been dealt, and we've taken every opportunity that we can get, there's been a crack in the narrative. And the last couple of weeks in New Zealand, we've had discussion in Parliament about the fact that ministers in the previous government hid information, for instance, about the harmful effects of the COVID-19 injections on children, and this is in part because pressure, OIA requests, working constantly on whatever contacts we have in what you might consider mainstream media, leveraging relationships, and New Zealand is smaller, and you're perhaps more likely to bump into a politician in the supermarket or somebody of influence here than you are perhaps in Australia or bigger countries. And a result of that, we got this Royal Commission, and they really dropped the ball. They were under pressure all the way through the process, and they dropped the ball, and they produced this report which sought to show that government ministers can be insulated from information that didn't get to them, even if experts came up with information. If it was blocked, it wasn't the minister's fault. But we found out very quickly, because we've known since 2022, because we've stayed the course, that ministers did know. So this is, broken into the mainstream consciousness, and also there's been a shift in some of the mainstream media organisations and the ownership and the sort of editorial approach to things. And there is a degree of soul searching that's gone on, such that these stories are now in the public domain. And this wouldn't have happened if the main groups here. So there's Voices for Freedom, the Health Forum, which is a sort of landing strip or an anchor for the many people that have been jab injured. They found support and solace and community there. And ourselves. We feel we've cracked the narrative, and we're certainly not going anywhere. And if it looks like we've been invisible, that's partly censorship, but also, if people are told enough that they're fragmented, they're arguing amongst themselves, then maybe they'll start to believe it. And some of these narratives, of course, will be causing hoots of relief and laughter on the other side, who actually are facing So some pretty hefty charges in a perfect world down the line. And this repositioning has seen now a national conversation, or at least one, a significant one, on platforms that never would have given this sort of stuff the light of day around, the question: has there been criminality here? And yes, we're all aware of the siloing and the sieves that we can be put through, but we just do what we can do with the information we've been given. And so that the fact of the abuses, the fact that we do have laws, we're all looking at them, we're all agreeing what the laws should say, and we're coalescing around the fact that we're going to uphold them, and when we're not going quietly into the night. That's for sure on this side of the ditch.
Jason, thank you for joining us. It's always nice working with you. Reminds me of the old days. All I wanted was a violin. Tell us your thoughts.
Well, look, the freedom movement was all about revolution. We'd seen the line in the sand. We went along and we said we will not be participating. We got together in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands at the various rallies. And the political parties, the third parties, were emerging, and in the process, people were going along and getting excited. And then when the elections came of 2022, well, the results spoke for themselves. We had virtually no penetration whatsoever, not just in the lack of seats, but also in the lack of first preference voting. I mean, even One Nation didn't get over 10% across the board. And so most of the voting was still mainstream. So for all of our chest banging and all the work that we'd done, we really didn't get a real result. Now, if you fast forward to 2025, there was a little bit of an improvement. One Nation's picked up a couple of Senate seats. But it really wasn't until the South Australian state election a couple of weeks back that we saw that One Nation's vote getting into the 20 percentile band, that finally people were starting to realise that they had to make a move on voting day when they walked into the school. They weren't going to vote for the same two parties anymore. They were going to reach out. And what it means is that the freedom movement as such was working for revolution, whether they thought about it or not. Firstly, they thought they would get it at the ballot box, and they didn't. So now begins the hard work of the political process, and it is bloody hard work. If you join a minor political party with 0.5%, 1%, 2%, 3% support, you go in there and the people that you meet are generally those that have come from other parties that are disillusioned, and the same ideas get bandied about. Well, we've got to go and get a marquee and stand at a market stall and hand out. We've got to go and door knock and talk about our policies. And I'm like, we're not the Liberal Party. We're not the Labor Party. We're not the National Party. We're not even the Greens. No one knows who we are. And the attention span is about as long as Tony Abbott proved in 2013 when he said $5 a week off your power bill, wonder where that came from, Albo, and stop the boats. He got 7 words out in 2 sentences and hammered them. And here we are trying to talk about detail and minutiae to the general public, because politics is 51 beats 49. And unfortunately, as Russell Broadbent explained to me, he said politics on idealism only ever gets you to 10%. And that's the problem that we have. So where we're headed now is the process of combining politically. And the first port of call was for people to leave and to go to One Nation, both mainly from the Liberals and probably the Nationals, and a little bit of activity amongst the third parties. And I'm finding in my party that we've got people coming along to branch meetings that we're inviting in that won't commit $50 a year to become a member, because what they're trying to do is to play one against the other to see either if there's going to be a merge, which there is work behind the scenes, or whether they're going to go to vote for One Nation, because no one wants to back losers anymore either. And so when they get a sniff with One Nation, that's a different approach to it. So I think it's maturing. And of course, the other thing is, to back up what Peter said, the blackpilling out there on social media in certain groups is just off the charts. There are just people now that are professional whingers that aren't the ones that go into branch meetings, aren't the ones doing any work, but they want to go out there. And I say to them, you're literally trying to prove that you want to be the smartest guy in Auschwitz. So when everyone gets rounded up at the end of this, and for all the Trump supporting that's going on, if he loses, anyone who supported Trump will be rounded up and put into a home or a prison or something, and you want to say, I told you so. What are you going to do about it? And that's what frustrates me the most about it, is that you have to put in the hard yards. And unfortunately, because the movement itself doesn't have a natural leader, there are a few around. There's nobody to bring people along, and it desperately is calling out from a good leader from the centre who's able to bring people along.
Peter, we've all noticed that Carl Stefanovic is the new Joe Rogan. As we chuckle, but that's what the legacy media is sprouting. That is the new Joe Rogan, and we have others also moving sideways into the independent media sphere, into the social media with their podcast and their probing questions on why we told lies about. No, they didn't talk about that bit about COVID. Why we did bad things, and we've changed. How dangerous, tell me, how dangerous, because what's happening, and I think you would all agree here, that when you start moving another narrative over, and even though it's watered down, almost like nudging, all of a sudden you're going to have this like a sort of a haze or a mist on where's the truth. You're sort of feeling your way through. If you keep pushing, and I've read all the comments about, not all of them, but a number of them about Carl, and isn't it great that he's on? He's going to save the world. We go back a couple of, go back 12 months, 18 months, and he was very much legacy media and still is. Does the morning show on Channel 9, rumoured to be going over to radio sometime next year when his contract expires, I would imagine. So we have this morphing. Or no, not morphing. We have a migration flow from legacy media or mainstream media to the other side. And if you look at what's been happening in the UK and throughout Europe with a particular gentleman, how he controlled all the many independent journalists around Europe and around the world, the message coming out, if you do it enough, like good advertising, it distorts what the whole thing was all about in the first place, and that was to tell the truth, to search for the truth. How dangerous do you think, and how effective is this morphing of Carl Stefanovic and others onto the other side with a very mild view on what had happened, and they're asking for forgiveness for their terrible indiscretions? Not sincere, and I think very dangerous, Peter.
I tend to agree. This is what you call controlled opposition. This is the powers that be realising the power of the podcaster. Now, Rogan will tell you straight to your face that he started life as a Democrat. And, you've had Alex Jones out there for 35 years or whatever. And at the moment, you've got the Onion pretending to take over. They haven't taken over. That they first announced that over 18 months ago that they'd taken over InfoWars, and they're back in the New York Post just in the last news cycle or so, telling people that they've finally achieved it. They're in the building and they're replacing Alex, and they've got a comedian who's going to take Alex's name and face, and they're going to repurpose InfoWars and correct all the misinformation that InfoWars has put out over the years. Well, Alex Jones, like David Icke and several others, have been way ahead of the curve. Stu Peters is another one, Mike Adams, way ahead of the curve in getting the truth out there. But the powers that be have worked out the audience that some of these fellas are getting. Jones has got the commercial radio agreements across the US, and he still has those to this day, and he'll still have those after they get InfoWars' name and studio away from him, and he'll go to a new platform and he'll continue doing exactly what he's done. But they see that if they can claim Alex's name, or put someone like Carl Stefanovic in, a raging lefty, and obviously not at all concerned with anything much beyond his own future, his own reputation amongst lefties, because seriously, who amongst conservatives or freedom lovers is going to be listening to Carl Stefanovic in any serious way, rather than just for comedic value? After the whole COVID psyop and pandemic went on, and he was there pushing it the whole way through. You don't redeem that, mate. You're suspect forevermore. But, the podcasters have the power. The legacy media is dying. I updated my bio with you guys to say I've been banned again from legacy media, from the opinion columns in the newspapers, because I can't stop talking about the globalists and the planned destruction of Western civilization, and why they're crush loading us with people from the third world and all of that. So, obviously, if I'm going to say things like this that are so truthy, I'll get banned, and that's fair enough. But I'm at the point now where I'm even forgetting to read the legacy media, because it's just the same thing over and over again. Get your measles shot. Oh, global warming. Oh, the ice is melting. Come on. We've been hearing these same lies for, well, in my case, I first wrote to a newspaper 50 years ago.
Oh my God. I didn't know they were lying. Matt, I'm shocked that I would be lied to. The next time they're telling me that the vaccine is a vaccine.
Not only do they lie to you, they make you pay for it.
Yeah, but Matt, we're all in independent media. I have to say, the longer you're in it, and the experiences that you can have with independent media, it's as murky as, probably murkier in many ways, as legacy media. At least legacy media, where the check is coming from. Independent media, you've got to ask yourself, how do they eat? Someone has to be paying some bill, unless they have huge numbers and YouTube hasn't scrapped them off the planet just yet. So credibility, Matt, in say independent media. How do we? Because it's a bit like the Wild West on many occasions. How do we bring back? Because whether I'm naive, but when we kicked off, there weren't that many around. And those that were around generally were pushing, it might be a bit of a different message, but at the end of the day, it was still the same plate of lamb. It's just maybe delivered a bit differently. Nowadays, it's everybody. And you see so many people on camera or podcast, just the audio, but there are so many out there. And everyone's got their own theory. How do we get back to just the truth and a bit of reality?
Well, that's probably the best of the many good points you just made there. So talking uniquely about and I don't think of ourselves as a media organization, but actually, we have to be active on social media. We have to use the internet. We have our own website, and we get by entirely on donations from people. But our USP, if you like, our kind of, I do not want to use the word corporate, message or whatever, is simply that as we've all tried to do in our professional careers, we try and work out what the truth is, and just tell it in the most effective, but compassionate and rational way that we can. So we've had an advantage, I suppose, in that sticking to that makes us relatively unassailable from a kind of moral and ethical and truth perspective. But yes, everybody has to eat. And just because people are on our side of the divide doesn't mean, they're innately compromised, or the fact that they're going to have to raise money somehow means that everything they say is rubbish. And we've got to be very careful of our own version of tall poppy syndrome. We're all united by a hell of a lot. We can smell the bullshit. We don't like when children are killed. And young people and healthy older people are just cut down at the knees before their time. We actually don't like it. So it's not just that we're being lied to, that we have to stomach. It's that we're actually being, some of us anyway, cold, and some people are disabled and will be for the rest of their lives, and will have a miserable time. And then there's all the economic fallout as well. So, I don't think we need to, self-flagellate about the fact that we're having to, try and occupy the same ground or use the same media platforms that our opponents do. But the other thing I will say is I think I remember when I was living in Australia, and I've sort of seen a little bit tonight, is that people were much more, obsessed maybe is a bit of a cruel word, but they were tied up with the media and the personalities and the story that was delivered to them about how their lives were supposed to be, in a way that we don't have so much here. Yes, there are still people wedded to the mainstream media, but it is dying, as Peter said. And there is a hunger for the new style of people, this smorgasbord of people that those of us now who've got finely honed instincts of who's out to do us harm or who actually shares our values, can use to actually decide fairly quickly who we wish to follow. And in a way, that's a much more democratic, if I can still borrow the better meaning of that word, way that that this is all going to sort itself out. Because the right people stick out like a sore thumb. And I just want to also say that there's another view of people like I can't remember the name of the guy who's just tried to come clean but hasn't. We've got a guy here as well who's done the same thing. He did an interview and he basically said, my life is now hell. Every day I'm barracked by people for the rah I did in support of the jab narrative. I still think the jab was a good idea, but I was wrong about the unquestioning support I gave. But I was afraid, I was lonely, I was insecure. It seemed like the best fun place to be. And he touched on a number of things. And he got relatively savaged, as you might expect, from people who said, he's lying, he's just trying to have a bob each way. This is disingenuous. But we're hardly going to get or encourage people, to wake up and see the light, because there is a hell of a lot that to come. There's going to be a giant hangover, and I personally see a better future from all this, but this is going to be a rough ride for a lot of people. If when they do, we instantly savage them without seeing the opportunity to point out the good in the situation. And maybe that's just the idealistic dumb doctor, well, he used to be a doctor, talking, I don't know, but I think that there's a bit of nuance to be had here.
Jason, and you and I have always pounded on about censorship, and whether I agree with the guy next door, he's got every right to say what he thinks or she thinks. Whether I agree, that's up to me. I can be responsible for what I do and think. Government, though, doesn't want that. Big tech doesn't want that. The media, mainstream legacy media, they don't want that. Where do we go from here with censorship? Because censorship, it's at the creep. If you look at the UK, they're following all sorts of things. If you're under 16, you can't be listening, reading, looking, whatever at anything. Yet they still do. So you would probably think that the censorship is to silence whether it's the silent majority or the minority. They have no right to do that. What do we do about it? How do we get around it? Because censorship and the rules and restrictions, and if you look at what Apple is doing, all the data they're going to provide, and it just goes on and on. What do we do? How do we protect ourselves? How do we maintain that voice?
We've just learned today that in the UK they've voted for a lifetime ban for people born after 2009, and they'll keep updating that year on year on smoking. So if you're born in the UK after 2009, no smoking for you, because it's a safety concern. But at the same time, when you say that we have a safety concern about some supposed preventative medicine that doesn't prevent, well, we're not going to look at it. Now, when it comes to censorship, I just want to go back a little bit to your comments earlier with Peter again on Karl Stefanovic. I see Karl's move as entirely voluntary. He's done that because he knows his contract is up at the end of the year. And obviously he's seen that the money that's coming in from the Rogans and the Tucker Carlsons, etc., well, it's not a bad industry to be in the podcast industry. And he's testing himself until he gets to the end of the year to see how he'll go. And he's doing quite well at it. And there is a radio contract, maybe at ARN, to replace Kyle and Jackie O if that station's able to pay them out and continue. But there'll be some radio contract, according to people that I know who I've made acquaintance of that worked with Carl in the executive news area there as well, who it's quite interesting because when I asked them if they had watched, these are retired people now, I asked, have you watched the Karl Stefanovic podcast? And they put their hands up and said, oh, no, I'm over Karl, I don't want to do anything about it. And I found that interesting. So obviously Karl on his $7-figure, $2-3 million a year salary certainly had plenty of clout within the studios there at Channel 9, but also might have put a few noses out of joint. Importantly, on the Stefanovic story there, he was very good friends with Shane Warne. And we only saw, a week or two ago, Jackson Warne on the Two Worlds Collide podcast come straight out and say, I think the COVID jab got my dad. Now, that's a big call. Now, Carl did take, I believe, 3 jabs and then pulled stumps and said no more. He was fed up, realised that he still got COVID, didn't want it. So he's been talking out against it softly for some time now, certainly not well before he started on the podcast circuit. But here's the thing on that podcast. He's able to interview people that we probably couldn't get access to. Now, we interviewed John Wagner the other day on SAF, on sustainable aviation fuels. And interestingly, Kevin Lockrade put out a post on that a week or two earlier.
Kevin Lockrade.
Kevin Lockrade put out a post on sustainable aviation fuel and making fuel out of municipal waste. And he was hammered by a few One Nation people and a few others. And I said, hang on a second, Kevin knows what's going on here. He's been in the military, etc. No, Kevin's a shill and a fraud, all the usual accusations. And then John Wagner comes out and talks about it in great detail about how he's actually doing it, how Boeing is going to take 120 million litres or so a year of this particular fuel that they're creating. Now, park that aside. The Stefanovic story is quite big. He had Clive Palmer on the show. He had Rennick, and then he had Rennick back again with Alex Antic. He had Matt Canavan on the show. He's had plenty of people on the show. And he's also talking about the merge. Now, he's kind of going, you guys have got to merge. Now, when Stefanovic says that, and he says it to technically half his audience would be people checking him out and the other half would be people who are following because they follow Channel 9 and Stefanovic. So he's able to bring a lot more people together than we've been able to do combined. So I think that there's a big positive there. Now, when you go back to censorship, I think that we are in a particular situation now in the world of the AI, the monitoring, et cetera, it is a free-for-all for governments until we hit the critical mass, and that is when accountability finally takes hold. Now, most people thought the Epstein files was going to be it. The Epstein files come out, all of a sudden everyone who is mentioned is going to be in handcuffs, and all of a sudden that's the great big revolution. Well, that was never going to happen because you don't have that evidence in there on emails, etc., and we haven't seen any of the photographs that the FBI are allegedly holding. And one would think that the one group of people that would be holding the best Epstein evidence, if and when it ever comes out, would be based in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, would have to be Mossad, because it was a Mossad operation. Most people would come along with that one. So that's parked for the moment. So in the meantime, we're getting daily news out of the US about Russiagate again. We're getting news about potentially that the nuclear dust in Iran could be uranium-1. That's the whole sum of all fears story in the background. Now, if that happens, that takes out everyone all the way up to Obama, all of the spy agencies, the whole lot. That's justice. That's accountability. And that all happens before the midterms. Now, the crazy thing about the US is that they're holding the FIFA World Cup in June. Steven Spielberg's movie Disclosure Day comes out in June, and they're going to head into a November midterm election. And we're getting everyday stories about UFOs and UAPs and disclosure, etc. There is so much brewing behind the story. The Black Pillars will tell you it's all fake. The moon trip was fake. The Artemis thing was all shot in a studio. This is all aliens, not demons. Like, it's how far do you go with it? But I just feel like what's happening now is that there's so many balls in the air and so much happening. And Trump didn't get in this deal to lose, and the ramifications for what happens there when Iran is finally dealt with changes the oil equation completely. The price of oil will crash, the fuel price will crash, the inflation will back off. Suddenly people will see that there's some prosperity going on and there's a real chance here. And at last, that the deep state and City of London and all that stuff is finally held to account. At that point, then we can deal with the beauty of the censorship and what we really want to be able to do, which for most people is the same. Doesn't matter if you're left, right, Jew, Muslim, Christian, whatever. We all love our families. We all love our kids. We really just want to pay off our homes and leave the world a better place for our grandkids, for goodness sake. And we've been dealt with these crazy people under nonsense such as sustainability and equity and open borders and unlimited welfare and money growing on trees, all I want to ask those guys is, tell us what the ideal global population is, and then we'll be able to judge whether you're trying to kill us or whether you're trying to work for us.
Peter, I have to ask you this because I'm sure you've looked up at the sky, the stars, and wondered. And Jason just mentioned UFOs. Do you think they're coming from faraway planets such as Uranus? So, anyways, but I'm just thinking, Jason. I mean, I agree and I don't agree. I think this is the problem we have at the moment. But here's a question. I was going to ask you this, Jason. I'll ask Peter this. Peter, we've been talking about where have all the freedom groups gone, and they normally did it through podcast and video and stuff like that. What we have established is that the number of podcasts are expanding beyond belief. We have everybody, every man and his dog wants to be a saviour of the world or a communicator of great note. If you migrate all those from legacy media, and don't forget Carl has huge money behind him, along with many others have a lot of money behind him, and if they start morphing into, say, for example, the political arena of those doing podcasts, all of a sudden we have a great number of podcasters from legacy media, and we have a great number from within who have decided that they want to be a communicator of some note. So all of a sudden, because when I started off with Asia Pacific Today, there were a few around, but not as many as there are now. Do you think there's a chance that you can get lost amongst all the other podcasters, and to keep searching and searching and searching for that 1 hour revelation, that the information overload, and because of the numbers out there, it hits home. So there'll be many that will miss out, and we're going to water the thing down. Just as a side note, Jason, the numbers from Carl Stefanovic are astronomical, and that's what working for Channel 9 does for you, and having a presence on the morning show. Peter, do you think we have too many podcasters out there and that we've all been watered down?
We've definitely been watered down. It's hard to say that there's too many, particularly in the modern era when everybody's a podcaster. They've just got to pull the phone out of their pocket and put their selfie camera on and send it straight to their social media app of choice. Now, I don't think there is any solution for the dilution of thought, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing either. I look at my YouTube subscriptions of an evening, and there's literally dozens of creators that I subscribe to, and I go through and I pick out the topics that look interesting. Same with Rumble, same with Spotify when I'm moving about during the day. And on top of that, I have on my Samsung phone, a Samsung internet app open, which has, I think, 18 different commentators that are banned from all the mainstream platforms. So I can just go directly to their sites, click on their tab, go to their site, listen to their latest update. And in that way, you get the diversity of opinion that allows you to be more informed than you would be if you were just watching legacy media. And of course, these days, you don't find people watching legacy media on the TV in the corner of their room. They're watching YouTube on that. They're streaming across to their smart TV. Can I just quickly comment on what Jason said about what their ideal population is? It's 500 million. They had that engraved in 7 modern languages and 8 ancient languages on their Georgia Guidestones, which were paid for by a legacy media billionaire. I forget his name. It was the chap that started CNN, I believe. And they blew them up during the COVID pandemic because it was just too obvious. Their first commandment, their first modern commandment on their Georgia Guidestones was maintain the human population at a sustainable level of 500 million. Well, guess what? The warmer the climate becomes as a consequence of solar cycles, and the more CO2 is outgassed by the oceans, because that's where it comes from, then the more humans and other individuals of all the species on the planet can be sustained. And there's plenty of argument out there that if it weren't for the globalist community making shortages out of everything, that the planet could easily sustain 20 billion people, and probably a lot more than that. So, you know, the fact is they're Malthusians. They don't like the fact that we're prosperous. And that's why they're opening up their current war on energy. And I call it the World Energy War, because World War III just seems a bit ridiculous, but the World Energy War, they're going to do whatever they can to choke off the supply. And this is evident in the actions of the Labor Liberal National Green Teal Uni Party over the last 4 decades or so, is, you know, getting rid of the infrastructure, putting us at the tail end of a very long and vulnerable supply chain. They know exactly what they're doing. These people aren't stupid. Individuals might be, you know, the post turtles like you know, Albo and Chalmers and Bowen and their equivalents in the other parties, in the other legacy parties. But their handlers know exactly what they're doing. And that's why everyone should be quite concerned at the moment. We shouldn't be too worried about what's happening in media, or either legacy or alternate. We shouldn't really be worried about the freedom movements. We should be looking as hard and as carefully as we can at the big picture. We know they tried to depopulate us during COVID. That was a trial run. They tested to see the level of compliance, and it was very high. It was probably 90%. There's people out there that took the jabs that absolutely shouldn't have, you know, that knew better, but took them anyway because they needed to travel. You know, that was the big, I've got to work, I've got to earn a living, I've got to pay my mortgage. Well, guess what? As I said at the time, and have said since, if everybody had just said no, then they wouldn't have had any power. But they depend on compliance, and consequently they are going to invade the alternate media space to the best of their ability, using their vast wealth and resources, and they are going to dilute the sensible commentators. And we're almost at the point where you've got to rely on, you've got to go to your local conspiracy theorist and ask him who the heck that you should be following, where you're going to get accurate information, or at least information that's not completely poisoned by that incredibly wealthy group of individuals that want to control what everybody does. And that's where they're leading. And that's in the intro to this live section of this show. Your promo video there was talking about the UN sustainability goals. They've laid it out for us. It's right there. Anyone can look at it. It's all doublespeak. It's all very Orwellian. You know, that they go out of their way to hide the message in plain sight. That's what they're doing. 15-minute cities. There's one about to start in the UK. I forget the name. I was looking at on X this morning. You know, they've got their cameras up. They've got their 15-minute city zones. You won't be allowed to leave. Yeah.
Can I ask you, if you don't mind, Matt? We're just progressing through this. I have been often quoted. I said a while ago that I don't think people want the truth. They want to hear something from their favourite, say, broadcaster, or podcaster. And I still stand by that, by the way. I think people, the truth is, I suppose, between the ears, which would, a couple of things here, it would show you that we used to be a questioning race. I mean, it's for both sides too. It's legacy and also in alt media, but we used to ask questions, always ask a question, ask that question, find out if that's true. Do you think when you look at the Joe Rogans and you look at the Carl Stefanovics and all these big ones, you look at the smaller ones, Harvey Yemedy and those people, they're all pushing something, and their audience, if you watch it, doesn't really fluctuate. It's that group of people that want to hear the next revelation, and they don't really care about the truth. I don't think so anyway. What do you think about that? Do you think that we've got to a stage where reality is, again, between the ears and what you're being told by a particular podcaster? And Peter's and Jason have mentioned Joe Rogan and all mental block time, but all the others. They come out with particular points of view, and it can get them into a lot of trouble. But the people still follow them. You know, they still follow those people with their beliefs and stuff like that. So do you think that we don't really care about the truth anymore? that we just care about wanting to hear what we want to hear. We probably need your microphone on. That's close to it.
Sorry, my computer sounded like it was about to blow itself up, so I thought I'd better just turn the microphone off in case it did. You've made a lot of generalizations there that have a lot of truth in them. But actually, people are made up of many different groups. But look, the clickbait phenomenon works on both sides of the divide. And there's a desperation for dopamine. Everybody's looking for their next hit on that piece of information that could break the whole thing. But what's going to break the whole thing is if they get off the couch and they put the mouse down and they divorce themselves somewhat from the screen and they reconnect with their communities and they get out and do something about it. This isn't going to be one on the couch or in front of the PC or whatever. But you've touched on the biases, and this last 5 years have just shown how malleable and manipulatable we all are. How human psychology is just full of buttons that can be pushed. The marketers have known this for decades, and so we are on the receiving end of a sort of state-of-the-art military-grade kind of manipulation operation. But it hasn't worked on all of us. And those of us on the right side, we may not have been so audible and so visible, but that's because we've had our heads down and our buns in the air, with our sleeves rolled up, working really hard. So for instance, there's a lot going on here at the local government level, and I noticed a lot of the talk defers to politicians, and we still have this large part that our institutions and the people in it seem to play in our lives, but they're long gone as far as the people who are going to get us out of this. It's going to be us ourselves, and the people who we represent, a sort of, I don't want to use the word citadel on the hill because that sounds a bit too grand, but people need another place to start looking and listening. That they need somewhere that's going to offer them more than they realize that they're getting. And I come back, and we come back, my group, you can't just knowingly kill and injure people. There's a kind of a bottom line that all of us would probably agree with once we realize it's happening. And so it's that pushing, and whether it's going to be that, or whether it's going to be climate for somebody, or gender assaults, the assaults on kids' identities, and all of that stuff. And the 15-minute city, by the way, is Oxford in the UK, which was my hometown. It's where I grew up. It is all happening, but on a basic fundamental, human values and rights level, the right to life, the right not to be subjected to cruel and degrading treatment. These are all important, and when they're abused, you get straight smack into the criminal law. And I think there is a burgeoning awareness that now is the time that we that we make a stand, and the one leader to emerge. I think that ain't going to happen because we're all smart enough to realize what will happen to that person, who's first over the trench. So there's a kind of a distributed, almost sort of blockchain leadership, certainly that has sort of sorted itself out here in New Zealand, and we're all doing our own things, but we're kind of working shoulder to shoulder. Yes, we're all competing largely for the same public funding, but it's kind of shaken itself down, and the people who were always going to be a bit dangerous or a bit crazy or dancing to an obvious agenda, even if we didn't know what it was, have kind of become visible, and the rest of us have just still got our sleeves up, and are still talking the talk as best as I can state that. So I think there's room for optimism, and I always feel I come on this show to cheer you up a bit, Mike, and I hope I've done that a little bit.
You have indeed. You're a good doctor. The prognosis is looking positive. Jason, at TNT, that I was quite a stickler on don't enhance the truth, just tell it as it is. And your recent experiences, you've had people you've worked with that have gone down a path of, I would probably think of ill advisement. I'll be polite here. How do we decipher what is BS and what is the truth? And am I right in saying that people really, at the end of the day, don't want the truth? They want to know They want to hear something from their particular celebrity, communicator, that resonates between the two ears.
Well, I reckon Matt would probably be well placed to put some explanation over it, but I think people are just after 5 years are suffering tremendous PTSD. And what that means, therefore, is that they then follow their own bias in terms of narrative. So you've got the great so-called MAGA split, but really it's the podcaster split, the Tucker Carlson's imagine Alex Jones calling for the 25th Amendment against Trump. I mean, is he out of his mind, or has he become a parody of a parody at this point? Like Tucker Carlson regretting supporting Trump. So what was he going to do, vote for Kamala Harris? I mean, stop being an absolute imbecile.
No. He didn't regret voting for Trump. He regrets what he's doing now.
Well, I just find it fascinating that you're at this stage in the game, and you're kind of trying to work out where you want to change. But Alex Jones just blew my mind, and then the whole Candace Owens story behind the story has got it's basically divided the subject to pro-Israel, anti-Israel, anti-Israel, anti-Jew, anti-Semite. Like there's layer upon layer upon layer of it. And it just gets to a point where you just got to go, well, there's obviously a narrative for everyone here. Which way is it going to fall? And we're right in the middle of it as it happens. I mean, people were saying to me after December in Bondi that it was a false flag. How is it a false flag? It's that type of detail, etc. I'm pretty sure that the kids and the people that died there were innocent Jewish people that died. I'm pretty sure that when David Ossip at the Jewish Board of Deputies got up and gave a serve to Albanese and said, we've got every right to be here, we're on the First Fleet like other people that came, that he's got a legitimate argument. So, where do we go next in this process? For mine, I look at it very simply. We are at an emotional crossroads, a political crossroads, and we have a huge surge of support for One Nation that appears to have perhaps reached its peak. If you want to go support One Nation, go and support them, but become a member, go to branch meetings and see how good they are. Or join one of your third parties and get involved and do the hard yards and insist on a merging solution. And that's actually what I've decided to write a short book on. I want to keep it to 60 or 80 pages. It's going to be called Merge or Die, and it's going to explain exactly where we are. I'll just explain it like this. The seat of Finnis in South Australia at the recent election, the incumbent Liberal had 43% first preference support in the last election. This election, his support went down to 27.9%. The One Nation candidate finished second on 22.1%, a combined 50%. The Liberal was first, didn't win the seat. One Nation was second, didn't win the seat. Labor was third, didn't win the seat. Fourth place, first time ever in Australian history, an independent got up with 18% of the first preference vote. The two-party preferred between the independent was 55 and the Liberal was 45. So between Liberal and One Nation, combined first preference was 50, and they went backwards off the preferencing. If that doesn't say you got to merge, otherwise you die, I don't know what is. And I think that's the process of where we're at. You've got to follow a process, and if it breaks by 28 and it doesn't get anywhere, you've got 31 to get serious, or you simply call for revolution at that point. But at least you've put in it's a process. You can't get revolution without having to have gone through this very difficult stage. And as we are already, 6 years in with PTSD, we've either got to get up, dust ourselves off and get on with it, or we're going to perish along the way. But I, for one, have got this far in, I can't give up now. And I've got too many kids to look out for. And I know with people like with Matt and Peter and yourself, I know none of us are giving up yet. So we just keep going, but we just got to get better and smarter at it.
We're like that ever ready,
That's what we've got.
Yeah, but Peter will go out with his shotgun. Sorry, I'm being a bit frivolous here. You can tell Vicky that I'm a bad boy. Just to wrap it up, I think, in my opinion, my humble opinion, I think there's too many. I think good on them. It's fantastic. I think it's almost impossible for people to decipher truth from untruth. I think there's there's a push from all sorts of all sorts of areas around the world. We've got we've talked about it. We've got all sorts of nudging going on. I'm not sure if the podcast. I think as entertainment value, it's fantastic, but as a movement to effect change in countries, I don't know anymore because I think there's too many. If that is correct, and you don't have to agree with me, but I would probably think there's a semblance of agreeance from all of you that there are just too many at the moment, and it's very hard to find who's telling the truth and who's telling the porkies. Where to from here for say the freedom movement, those that are anti-government overreach and our body, our right, stop the jabs, blah blah goes on. Where to from here? Do we get swallowed up by it's like a freeway? You build the road, and as more people live in the area, it gets fuller and fuller and fuller until the nice Sunday drive becomes a nightmare because of the number of cars. So the same thing with podcasting. If we need to make or have an effect on changing particular countries within, for example, Australia, and there are 1,001 podcasters that all go for an hour or an hour and a half or 45 minutes. Sometimes YouTube say optimal time is 8.10 seconds or something, 8 minutes and 10 seconds. If they're all out there, how do we decipher truth from reality? How do we or from BS? And how can we make it more effective? Or is it just going to be swallowed up by becoming a mass? It's like a bird, 1,000 birds, 10,000 birds. All of a sudden, you're all part of that great flocks moving sideways to sideways. Where to from now, Peter?
The first thing to remember is that the people that own the big tech platforms also own the media. So these are what we call the globalists. They're not Jews, they're not Muslims, they're not Christians, they're actually Luciferians. And they have no intention of allowing anyone to get the sort of traction that you're describing there. And they're working to a tight time frame. They talk about the year 2030 all the time. And there's a reason for that. It's an artifact of the null point in the galactic electromagnetic sheet. So that's the galactic scale manifestation of the Parker instability that affects every rotating electromagnetic system. So they want all their systems in place by 2030 because shortly after 2030, a lot of these electronic systems are going to start breaking down. Now, their agenda is depopulation. They want everybody dependent on as much digital equipment and mechanisms as possible. So that's why they want digital currency. That's why they want water supplies, municipal water supplies dependent on the internet. This is why they want supply chains that are dependent on the internet, because the internet is going to go down. It's not going to survive the space weather that is coming. It's a cycle. There's plenty of archaeological evidence for this particular space weather manifestation. There's nothing that can be done for it. It can't be prevented. And probably by 2045 at the latest, electricity is going to be a distant memory. But they want to get the population down as much as possible before then, because they do not want survivors. They want to emerge from their bunkers, and this is why every billionaire has a bunker. They want to emerge from their bunkers as the undisputed rulers of this planet. And then they're going to, that's why they've got their seed banks. That's why they've got their CRISPR gene technology. They're going to repopulate the planet with people that they think of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. That's what they want. I mean, that's why there's so much predictive programming out there. That's why Huxley wrote Brave New World, exactly as predictive programming. So, yeah, I don't think there's a great deal of hope for media generally, or alternative or legacy. It's just going to be controlled tighter and tighter until you and I and Jason and Matt can't really voice our opinion. We'll just get banned. Simple as that.
They're going to shut us up. Matt, that's a fairly good point there from Peter. Do you think just the growth, the morphing of the not really caring about if it's the truth or not, or if there's a semblance of the truth. Do you think all those things combined, do you think it will become so congested that people like ourselves and you and others will be so much less effective in bringing upon change within our own boundaries and borders?
Yeah, that's possible. But look, I mean, you guys are obviously seasoned media guys, and where the freedom groups have gone, and where they need to flourish, is actually off media altogether. You know, they need to be back in the community, and in fact, there are established, mature networks of people who are actually spending more time together, you know, doing stuff, you know, learning skills, you know, sharing knowledge, just basically hanging out in the way that all humans have always done. And so this living our lives online and inhabiting this kind of amorphous sort of digital, you know, bad copy of ourselves has got us where we are today. And just to come back to the PTSD, and I'm not talking as a doctor because I can't, but look, many of us in the freedom movement found our way to this very quickly because, you know, we've all had things in our life that have caused us to sort of switch on the discernment gene, you know, the bullshit meter. You know, we spotted that we were being lied to and deceived because, you know, we've had the opportunity in our lives to kind of hone that skill. And more and more of the people who at the moment still maybe are working their way through the trauma of the last 5 years, you know, and there's a lot of grief in that. You know, and grief can paralyze people, and they you know, they're depressed and they grieve for the life that they thought they could predict on. But you know, the longer they're in the new one, the more it becomes normal. So you know, if people disappear offline, and what is online is just a sort of you know, a weed fest, you know, choked by anyone and everybody out to coin a buck. You know, and not all of those people are. Some of those are, you know, are good people, and they will, you know, they will be recognised. It's actually because we're planting our gardens and we're turning up at meetings and demonstrations, and we're also, as I say, reconnecting with people that we thought were lost forever, and people that would have seen us, you know, happily dead for being contrarian. You know, and there's a deep primal, you know, human instinct behind that. You know, you have to understand this. You know, there is some really good stuff coming, but for me, the bottom line is, and the great hope is to rediscover what the law actually tolerates and what it hasn't allowed these people to do, who've done it simply because they think they have this kind of mass effect, and that if enough of them do it, then it somehow makes it right, and it actually doesn't. And certainly here in New Zealand, there's a conversation now in the public, because it's always been in the chat rooms from day one. You know, this is criminal. When's somebody going to do something about it? When are these people going to come to court? Well, you know, if nothing actually comes of it, the public will see finally that even that, you know, even the ability to rely on basic human rights and the criminal law process when they're breached, if that's gone to us, then maybe that is the time for the, you know, the R word, the revolution that's been mentioned a few times. But as has been said, you know, people have to soak up a lot of punishment before they do it. And then, you know, it's a relatively small number of people that affect these momentous changes at the margins. You know, it always has been. And it'll probably have to be again, because as long as most other people get out of the way, that may well do the job.
Jason, if you have the final say here, and just I'd like you also to comment on what we've just been talking about, but I want to throw something at you. Sorry, about that. No, actually, I won't. I'll leave that one at the moment because it's going to develop into a long conversation. So we'll stick with what we've been talking about. Do you see that we're going to become so congested? So many podcasters out there that the message that you're putting out, that Matt's putting out, that Peter's been putting out, that I'm putting out, that others are putting out, that it will become lost amongst the multitude of other offerings out there? And if so, what about the truth? How do we know what is the truth?
Well, I think it's already lost out there. I already think that there's way too many podcasters and citizen journalists mixed in with legacy media, all trying survival of the fittest, which is really what it is. And then there's always the flavour of the month. You know, the Two Worlds Collide podcast came from nowhere. I don't find it particularly interesting. And he has six-figure views on YouTube within days of these releases. I don't know who's watching it, but they're watching it. Carl's doing, 250,000, up to 500,000, etc. But I have said this for some time now, that the solution for the independent media is to organise. And that's a dirty word because it's a left-wing type of word, but it's what it actually has to happen. Now, back in our TNT days, we had a code of conduct and it was on the website. And that's what I'm talking about. So if you're a podcaster now, and that's different from a broadcaster, it's just different, and it's not broadcasting as such, it's just out on the internet for people to find. Well, if you had a code of conduct that you adhered to, well, that's the starting point. And then what that would lead to is to be able to get an international certification and a press card. And suddenly, the good podcasters are going to turn up at particular political events and they're going to get called on to ask a question because they're recognised or they're good or they have an audience. And that's kind of the steps that take place. So in many ways, the podcasters might have to form some sort of union, another dirty word, but an organisation, a professional organisation, which will also allow them to become professionals. And then when they become professionals, they therefore have to meet said standards and will want to meet said standards so they don't have to go and host gigs at night or stack shelves or wash cars or whatever they're doing to be able to afford to stay home and do the podcasts for something that they truly believe in. And that's kind of what most people have had to do when they get that bug and they want to get out there and help change the way things are going and realise that what they've seen on telly is garbage and they want to produce something else. So it is a game of inches. Russell Broadbent, I'll quote him again, he says, a good leader starts from the centre and brings people along with him. That for me changed my perspective on the idealism approach, realised that I was a bit more of a pragmatist, realised that the work that I was already doing at TNT was kind of a centrist approach, certainly on the way that we delivered the facts and the way that we conducted ourselves, for which I'm very proud, and that was my turning point. Unfortunately, out there in social media land, I don't think it afforded me the best audience because I wasn't being that person that was over sensationalising and trying to bring people across. And I do see them on social media every day. They're always out there pushing some idea, selling something, rage baiting someone, and that's not my game.
Yeah,
just don't want to do it, not interested.
As I said, they don't want the truth, only from what they've been told that resonates between their ears. Just quickly, just make a point here that we all look at the numbers, YouTube and Rumble, X. Now our numbers on TNT on X, they stopped at 13,100, and at the moment, which moved over to the Pulse on X, it's about 150 maybe different from what it was 3 years ago, and it stopped. So the numbers stopped. If you look at YouTube, TNT, its numbers they're all right, nothing to rave home about. We actually found the real numbers after we went through Rumble and all sorts of bits and pieces, and we had, in 12 months, 140 million views. We had 20 million downloads. Now, you go to, and we hit that probably about 3 weeks before we finished. So we had large numbers, very big numbers, but on socials, and we all look at socials and look at the YouTube numbers. Oh, no one's listening or watching that person. Don't believe them at all. And you mentioned before, Jason, I think it was you that mentioned, how did they get all those numbers from that one podcast? Don't believe them. It is truly a manufactured piece of crap. And you go on there and you do your best, but the numbers are not reflective, whether you're Rumble, Facebook, YouTube, X, TikTok, it is not reflective on what you're saying. So what you're saying, Jason, and what you're putting out, keep doing it. Peter, whenever you get a guest appearance, keep doing it. Matt, you speak nothing but the truth, and the admiration is is forever from us. And we think you're doing a magnificent job in New Zealand because you're telling it as it is. And I think you all are telling it as it is. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Peter Campion, Matt Shelton, and Jason Olbourne, the world's greatest podcast. Sorry, I had to throw that in. And I like that you've put your backyard as a pic in the background. That's very nice of you to do that.
I would just say it's the only way I can afford the real estate in Sydney.
That's right. But at least you could afford to have that. I mean, we're working on getting 10 cents together to get some sort of licensed background. Thank you so much for your time. This has been The Protagonists. We'll be back either on Friday or next Monday. We're doing it, we're trying to stay alive at the moment, and health-wise it's not great. And we need to just wait. We are waiting for an investor who is there. But man, oh man, hopefully I'll be alive when it comes through, and then we'll kick it off again. Thank you so much. This has been The World Today, and this is The Protagonists. Catch you again very soon.